The afternoon sun hung high over the busy shopping center, casting long shadows across the crowded parking lot. Cars were moving slowly, searching for the few remaining spaces, and shoppers wandered between vehicles, bags in hand, chatting or trying to make it to their next stop. Among them, Malik carefully drove his car down a row, scanning for a spot. It had been a long morning of errands, and he was tired but patient. His focus was on finding a space as close as possible to the entrance so he could finish his shopping quickly and get home. As he turned the corner, Malik's eyes landed on the last open parking spot in the row. Relief washed over him, and he slowed the car, signaling politely as he prepared to pull in. Just as he began to move forward, a loud voice shouted from behind him, "Hey, that's my spot!" Malik glanced in the rearview mirror and saw a man striding toward him, face red with anger, pointing aggressively at the space. Malik took a deep breath. He had learned long ago that anger rarely solves anything. "Sir," he said calmly, "I saw this spot first. I was already pulling in." His tone was firm but polite, meant to diffuse the situation, not to provoke it. The man scoffed, stepping closer and invading Malik's personal space. "I don't care. Move your car," he barked, his voice dripping with hostility. Malik noticed the subtle sneer on the man's face, the way his eyes narrowed, and the venom behind his words. But Malik stayed calm, keeping both hands on the wheel, aware that reacting hastily could make things worse. The tension in the air was almost tangible. A few shoppers paused in their paths, sensing the potential for a conflict. Some stopped their conversations entirely, eyes shifting between Malik and the approaching man, wondering what would happen next. Malik could feel his pulse quicken, not with fear, but with the adrenaline of the moment. He had trained for years in martial arts, not just to defend himself, but to stay composed under pressure. Today, that training would matter more than ever, but he had no intention of showing it yet. The man took a step closer, his voice rising. "I said move." "Who do you think you are?" he yelled, each word aimed to intimidate. Malik exhaled slowly, trying to project calmness even as his body tensed. "I'm just trying to park my car," he replied evenly. "There's no need for this to get ugly." But the man didn't hear reason. His anger had already taken over, fueled by a mix of frustration and prejudice. He shoved Malik's car lightly with his hands, enough to rattle the vehicle. Malik's hands gripped the steering wheel tighter, and he leaned back slightly, careful not to make sudden movements that might escalate the situation further. "Sir, please stop," Malik said firmly. "We don't need to fight over a parking spot." The man laughed mockingly, stepping around the front of Malik's car as if to assert dominance. "Fight? You wouldn't last a second?" he sneered. The words were meant to provoke, to make Malik lose his composure. Malik felt the familiar calm rise inside him, a quiet confidence that came from years of discipline. He knew he could handle this, but the real challenge wasn't physical. It was keeping control of the situation without letting anger dictate his actions. By now, a small crowd had gathered. A few people were filming on their phones, whispering to each other, "This is getting intense," or, "I hope it doesn't turn violent." Malik noticed their eyes on him and the aggressor, but he didn't let it affect him. His focus remained on de-escalating the conflict, even as he prepared for the possibility that words might not be enough. The man lunged, shoving at the car again, this time with more force. Malik braced himself, feeling the car rock slightly, and leaned back, keeping his movements controlled. He didn't retaliate, didn't raise his voice. Instead, he used a simple, measured tone. "I'm asking you one last time. Please step back and calm down." The crowd murmured, sensing the tension. Some whispered warnings to the aggressor. Others whispered encouragement to Malik. A child clutched their parent's hand tightly, eyes wide. The energy in the lot was electric, a mix of fear, curiosity, and anticipation. The aggressor's face twisted with fury. "I don't have to calm down for anyone," he shouted. "You think you can just park here because you feel like it?" He took a step closer, fist clenched. The intent was clear. He wanted to intimidate, to dominate, to prove that Malik didn't belong in that space. Malik's body reacted instinctively. His posture shifted subtly, his muscles coiled, but his expression remained calm. He had been trained to respond, not react. Every movement was deliberate, every breath controlled. He had faced confrontations before, but nothing like this in public, with witnesses watching and an aggressor fueled by prejudice. He knew that one wrong move could make things worse, so he focused on maintaining his composure, while preparing to defend himself if necessary. The man lunged again, this time more aggressively. Malik sidestepped with precise timing, avoiding the impact entirely. The crowd gasped. A few people whispered, "Wow, did you see that?" Malik's movements were smooth, controlled, a clear sign of someone trained in martial arts. He didn't strike or retaliate. He simply positioned himself in a way that neutralized the threat. The aggressor stumbled slightly, shocked by Malik's skill and calmness. His anger turned into frustration. "What the hell?" he shouted, trying to regain control. But Malik didn't react to the taunts. Instead, he took a slow step back, keeping his eyes on the man, ready to respond if necessary, but unwilling to escalate the situation further. Some shoppers began speaking up. "Hey, back off, man," one shouted. "This isn't worth it." Others began filming more actively, capturing every moment. Malik noticed, but he didn't let the attention distract him. His priority was to prevent the situation from spiraling out of control. The aggressor, breathing heavily and sweating, realized that Malik wasn't responding the way he expected. Each push and shout was met with calm, precise movements. The man's attempts to intimidate were failing, and that failure only seemed to make him angrier. He shouted racial slurs, trying to provoke a reaction. Malik's jaw tightened slightly, but his voice remained steady. "I'm not here to fight you. Step back and leave," he said. At that moment, the parking lot felt frozen. The noise of engines, chatter, and footsteps seemed to fade into the background. Everyone was watching, waiting for the next move. Malik felt a strange mixture of awareness and calm. Years of martial arts had taught him that strength wasn't just physical, it was mental, emotional. And right now, the test wasn't how fast he could move or strike. It was whether he could maintain control under pressure. The man took a wild swing, aiming to hit Malik. Malik shifted his body slightly, letting the punch pass harmlessly, his movements fluid and precise. The crowd gasped again, and some muttered in disbelief. The aggressor froze, confused and humiliated. No one had expected Malik to be so skilled, to remain composed while under attack. For a moment, it seemed like time had slowed. The shoppers held their breath, some cheering silently, others capturing every second on their phones. Malik remained steady, breathing evenly, aware of every movement around him. He had the power to end the confrontation instantly, but his training had taught him that true mastery wasn't in hurting others. It was in controlling the situation without unnecessary violence. The man stumbled backward, his aggression faltering. Malik remained poised, his eyes fixed on the man, ready for whatever came next. The crowd started murmuring again, realizing that Malik was no ordinary person. He moved with the calm confidence of someone who had faced challenges far beyond a simple parking dispute. His presence alone seemed to demand respect, even from the man who had started this conflict. And as the tension in the lot began to settle, Malik knew this was only the beginning. The confrontation wasn't over yet, but the first move had been made. He had stood his ground, protected himself, and maintained control, all without raising his voice or striking a blow. The story of this day, of this moment, was just beginning to unfold. The tension in the parking lot had grown thick, almost as if the air itself had turned heavy. Malik's calm composure stood in sharp contrast to the aggressor's uncontrolled rage. The man's chest heaved as he tried to catch his breath, his face red and contorted with fury. A few onlookers whispered among themselves, some clutching their shopping bags tightly, others pointing their phones, ready to capture whatever might come next. Every eye seemed glued to the unfolding scene. The aggressor took a step forward, fists clenched tightly, his voice rising in anger and frustration. "I don't care how skilled you think you are. You don't belong here," he shouted. His words carried more than just anger. They carried a mixture of prejudice and entitlement, a belief that he had the right to intimidate someone he deemed different. Malik, however, did not flinch. His gaze remained steady, unwavering. He knew that reacting with fear or aggression would only escalate the situation. Then, without warning, the man lunged. It was sudden and reckless, a clear attempt to force Malik out of the parking space by sheer physical intimidation. Malik's body reacted instinctively, honed by years of martial arts training. He stepped slightly to the side, letting the man's momentum pass without taking a hit. His movements were fluid, precise, and deliberate, the kind of motion that only comes from countless hours of disciplined practice. The onlookers gasped. Whispers rippled through the crowd. "Did you see that? He didn't even get hit." Who is this guy? Some children peeked from behind their parents' legs, wide-eyed, sensing that something extraordinary was happening. But Malik didn't have time to think about the crowd. His full attention was on the aggressor, every movement, every shift in posture analyzed and anticipated. The man's face twisted in confusion and anger. He had expected Malik to react like most people, push back, shout, or show fear. But Malik's calmness, his steady stance, and the controlled way he moved were completely unexpected. Fueled by frustration, the aggressor swung his fist again, faster this time. But Malik simply sidestepped once more, his movements smooth and almost effortless. Malik spoke again, his voice calm but firm. "Stop this now. Step back and walk away." The words were simple, but they carried authority. There was no hesitation, no anger in his tone, only the kind of quiet command that comes from someone who is confident in both mind and body. But the man's rage had taken control. He wasn't listening. He swung again, trying to catch Malik off guard, but Malik anticipated the movement. With a quick, fluid motion, he blocked the swing without even raising his own fists aggressively. It wasn't about fighting. It was about control, about preventing harm while maintaining his composure. The crowd around them grew, forming a loose circle. Some people were clearly worried for Malik, while others seemed fascinated, unable to look away. A few shoppers whispered to each other, "He's like a professional or something." Others recorded short clips on their phones, knowing that what they were witnessing was unusual, remarkable, and worth sharing. The aggressor's attempts to intimidate only grew more desperate. He shouted racial slurs, trying to provoke an emotional reaction. Malik felt a flash of anger, a normal human response, but he swallowed it down, focusing instead on maintaining control. He understood something that few others in that lot did. Losing control, even for a second, could make a dangerous situation far worse. He had the ability to defend himself, yes, but restraint, not violence, was his true strength. The man swung once more, this time using his entire body, leaning into the attack with reckless force. Malik shifted slightly, his body moving almost instinctively, redirecting the energy without meeting it head-on. The motion was precise, controlled, and effortless, as if he were dancing rather than defending. The aggressor stumbled slightly, his attack failing completely. A few nearby shoppers gasped audibly, astonished by what they were seeing. Malik didn't strike back. He knew that hitting the man, even in self-defense, could escalate the situation in unpredictable ways. Instead, he maintained a defensive posture, keeping the aggressor at a safe distance while subtly guiding him away from the car. Each movement was calculated, a combination of defensive technique and psychological control. Malik understood that showing calm and strength often had a stronger effect than striking first. The crowd was now whispering loudly. "He's trained. I can't believe how calm he is." Some murmured in awe at Malik's composure, while others voiced concern for the aggressor. It was clear to everyone that Malik was not an ordinary man. Even the aggressor began to sense that he was outmatched, though he refused to admit it, stubbornly continuing his attempts to provoke. Then something unexpected happened. Malik used his stance and movements to subtly redirect the aggressor's momentum, causing him to stumble slightly backward. It was enough to break the rhythm of the attacks without causing harm. The aggressor's expression shifted for a moment, from rage to confusion to fear, as he realized that Malik was controlling the encounter with ease. "Enough," Malik said, his voice carrying over the murmurs of the crowd. "This ends now. Walk away before anyone gets hurt." The calmness in his tone contrasted sharply with the aggressor's frenzied shouting. It was a tone that implied not just authority, but also a readiness to act if absolutely necessary. For a brief moment, the man froze, breathing heavily. Sweat beaded on his forehead and his fists shook slightly. He looked around at the crowd, noticing the phones, the witnesses, the sheer astonishment in their eyes. He realized that this wasn't just a confrontation with one man. It was a public display of skill, control, and restraint. His attempts to intimidate had failed entirely, but the aggressor was not willing to surrender just yet. He lunged one more time, a desperate attempt to regain control. Malik's body reacted instantly, fluid and precise. He sidestepped, guided the aggressor's movement, and used a small, controlled motion to bring him safely to the ground. The man landed with a thud, winded, humiliated, and unable to continue his attacks. Malik didn't strike him. He simply ensured that the man could no longer continue to threaten anyone. The crowd erupted in whispers, murmurs, and quiet applause. Some people recorded the final moments on their phones, capturing the calm, controlled way Malik had handled the situation. A few approached him cautiously, asking if he was okay, praising his restraint and skill. Malik nodded quietly, taking slow breaths to steady himself. He felt no rush of triumph or anger, only relief that the situation had ended without serious injury. Security personnel arrived moments later, having been alerted by a bystander. They approached the aggressor, who was still on the ground, breathing heavily, clearly defeated and confused. Malik stepped back, giving them space. He didn't need to be involved any further. The trained security staff could handle the aftermath. Shoppers began to disperse, though many lingered nearby, discussing what had happened. Some approached Malik to express admiration, while others shared their astonishment over what they had witnessed. A few had caught glimpses of his movements and couldn't stop commenting on the precision and calmness with which he had neutralized the situation. Malik, meanwhile, reflected quietly. He understood that many people would focus on the aggressor's actions, on the racial slurs and the attempt at intimidation, but Malik knew the real story was different. It wasn't about the aggression or the anger. It was about maintaining control, protecting himself and others, and demonstrating that true strength is measured not by violence, but by restraint. Even as the adrenaline slowly faded, Malik remained aware of the crowd, the cameras, and the buzz around him. He knew that social media would likely share clips of this moment, perhaps even exaggerating or misinterpreting the situation. But that didn't matter. What mattered was that he had stood his ground, defended himself, and prevented harm without losing his composure or his principles. As Malik finally returned to his car, the parking lot seemed to settle back into its normal rhythm. Engines started, car doors closed, and shoppers continued their errands, though many still glanced back, unable to forget the unusual scene they had witnessed. Malik drove slowly, careful to leave the space and the confrontation behind, already thinking ahead to what the rest of the day would bring. But he also knew something else. Today's incident would stay with him. Not because of the fear or the confrontation, but because of what it represented. A moment where discipline, training, and inner strength had turned a potentially dangerous situation into a lesson in calm, controlled power. And though the man on the ground would likely not understand it, Malik had done exactly what he had hoped. He had prevented violence, maintained dignity, and shown that true strength comes from restraint and control, not anger. The parking lot, which had been bustling just moments before, now seemed to hold its breath. People froze in place, some whispering to one another, others staring wide-eyed at Malik and the man who had caused the disturbance. It was as if time itself had slowed, each movement magnified, each sound sharper than usual. Even the engines of nearby cars seemed quieter. The aggressor was still on the ground, breathing heavily, trying to regain his bearings. His anger had not yet faded, but he was shaken. His attempts to intimidate Malik had failed completely, leaving him both humiliated and confused. Malik stood a few feet away, composed, arms relaxed but ready, eyes calmly scanning the situation. Every muscle in his body was alert, every instinct tuned, but there was no trace of panic or aggression. He had handled the physical side of the confrontation, but he knew the situation wasn't over. The crowd had grown noticeably. A few people moved closer to get a better view, some clutching phones recording every detail. Others whispered nervously, debating whether to intervene or remain on the sidelines. "Should we call the police?" one person asked, their voice barely audible over the soft murmur of the crowd. Another replied, "I think security is already on the way. Just let them handle it." A few shoppers stepped forward cautiously, trying to mediate. "Sir, please calm down," one woman said to the aggressor, her voice firm but gentle. "There's no need to fight anymore." Her words seemed to have little immediate effect, as the man still looked angry and defensive, but it was clear he was starting to realize that his actions were being judged by everyone around him. Malik remained silent for a moment, observing both the man and the crowd. He understood that appearances were powerful. The way he stood, calm and in control, contrasted sharply with the aggressor's flustered, angry state. To many of the onlookers, it was clear who was in charge of the situation. Malik's presence carried authority, not through threat but through restraint and confidence. Security guards arrived shortly after, walking briskly toward the center of the commotion. One of them spoke to the aggressor, instructing him to step back and remain where he was. The man hesitated, confused and frustrated, but eventually complied, realizing that further resistance would only make him look worse in front of the crowd. The witnesses began to murmur among themselves, sharing their astonishment at what they had just witnessed. "Did you see that?" one whispered. "He didn't even touch him aggressively, and he totally controlled the situation." Another added, "I've never seen anyone so calm in a fight like that." Children peeked from behind their parents, their eyes wide as they tried to understand what had just happened. For some, it was a moment of fascination. For others, it was a lesson in courage and composure. Malik took a slow, deep breath, feeling the tension in the lot gradually ease. He knew the crowd was still watching, and that social media would soon capture clips of the event, but he didn't let it distract him. His focus remained on the present, ensuring that the aggressor was safely handled and that no further escalation occurred. Some bystanders cautiously approached Malik, speaking softly to avoid provoking the man further. "Are you okay?" one asked. Malik nodded, his expression calm. "Yes, thank you. I'm fine." There was no pride in his voice, no need to boast, just a quiet acknowledgement of concern. It was the kind of response that further reinforced the contrast between him and the aggressor, who was still flushed with anger. One of the shoppers, a young man in his 20s, spoke up to the crowd. "We should all remember this," he said. "It's not about who hits harder. Look at him, he's calm, controlled, and strong without being violent. That's the kind of strength we need to learn." His words seemed to resonate, and the crowd nodded in agreement, some murmuring affirmations. The aggressor tried to stand, but his movements were shaky, unsure. Security instructed him again to remain on the ground while they assessed the situation. It became clear to everyone that this man had overestimated his own strength and underestimated Malik's composure and skill. Some shoppers exchanged knowing glances, understanding that they had just witnessed a rare display of discipline and control. Meanwhile, Malik's mind was already moving ahead. He reflected on the encounter, not in anger or pride, but as a lesson. Every confrontation had a mental component, and he had learned to control his emotions, anticipate the opponent's moves, and protect himself without causing unnecessary harm. That mental training, more than his physical skills, had been key in preventing this situation from turning dangerous. As the crowd began to relax, a few people took a step closer to speak with Malik. "That was incredible," one man said quietly. "You didn't even strike him, but you handled him perfectly." Malik offered a small, polite nod. "Thank you. I just tried to stay calm and make sure no one got hurt." His words were simple, but they carried weight. The emphasis was on safety, not on proving dominance. Security had now escorted the aggressor to the edge of the parking lot, keeping him separated from the crowd. Malik finally allowed himself to step back, lowering his posture and releasing the tension in his muscles. Even though the immediate threat had passed, he remained vigilant, aware that the situation had drawn significant attention. A few people in the crowd began recording short interviews with each other, describing what had happened. "I've never seen anything like it," one woman said. "He was completely calm, completely in control. It's amazing," another added. "And the way he handled that guy, wow, that's the kind of behavior we should all aspire to." Their excitement was palpable, a mix of admiration and disbelief. Malik observed the reactions quietly, appreciating the human curiosity and concern around him. He knew that many of the onlookers were focused not just on the physical confrontation, but on the underlying message, how someone could stand firm against aggression and prejudice without losing their composure or humanity. Some shoppers started approaching him with questions, curious about how he had managed to stay so calm. "How did you do that?" one asked. Malik smiled faintly, though it was not a boastful smile. "It's about training, discipline, and staying calm under pressure," he explained simply. "Anyone can learn it. It's not about fighting, it's about control." Others nodded thoughtfully, clearly impressed and inspired. Children, who had been peeking from behind their parents, seemed to absorb the lesson unconsciously, learning that strength doesn't always come from aggression. It often comes from composure and wisdom. The parking lot slowly returned to normal activity. Cars moved past, people continued shopping, and the sounds of footsteps, chatter, and engines resumed. Yet there was a lingering energy in the air, a sense that something unusual had occurred. something that would be remembered long after the moment had passed. Malik stood near his car, taking a final deep breath and checking his surroundings. He felt no anger toward the aggressor, only an understanding of human behavior and the dangers of letting prejudice and frustration take control. Today had been a test, not of his skill alone, but of his patience, judgment, and ability to maintain humanity in the face of provocation. As security finished addressing the situation, Malik prepared to return to his errands. The crowd had mostly dispersed, but a few individuals lingered, clearly wanting to witness him leave. Some waved, offering nods of respect, while others whispered among themselves, replaying what they had seen. Malik acknowledged them quietly, maintaining the calm demeanor that had defined the encounter from the start. Driving away from the scene, Malik reflected on what had just happened. He knew that this event would likely spread quickly, especially with so many people filming, but he didn't worry about fame or recognition. What mattered was that he had prevented harm, remained true to his principles, and demonstrated that strength and discipline could coexist with restraint and compassion. The incident in the parking lot had started with anger, aggression, and prejudice, but it ended with calm control and quiet authority. Witnesses had seen the power of composure firsthand, and Malik had silently reinforced a lesson that could not be captured fully on any phone camera: that true strength lies in the mind, in the ability to stay grounded, and in the courage to respond with wisdom rather than impulse. Even as he drove away, Malik understood that this experience was more than a confrontation. It was a reminder of why he had dedicated years to his training. Not for recognition, not for glory, but for the ability to navigate a world where hostility and ignorance could arise at any moment. And as the busy streets absorbed him once more, he carried with him the quiet satisfaction of knowing he had acted with integrity, composure, and humanity, leaving an impression on all who had witnessed the moment. The parking lot had mostly returned to its normal rhythm, but the atmosphere was still charged. People lingered longer than usual, speaking in hushed tones and replaying the confrontation in their minds. The aggressor had been escorted away by security, muttering under his breath, still flushed with anger and embarrassment. Malik stood by his car, taking a slow breath and scanning the crowd, making sure no one else was about to escalate the situation. He felt calm, yet fully aware of the eyes still on him. Some shoppers began approaching him, curiosity and admiration in their expressions. "Are you really okay?" one woman asked, concern mixed with awe in her voice. Malik nodded. "Yes, I'm fine. Thank you for asking." He didn't offer any boastful remarks or dramatic gestures. He simply spoke the truth, his tone even and measured. A young man, likely in his 20s, came a little closer, holding his phone. "I was recording earlier. That was incredible," he said. "You didn't even hit him, but you controlled the whole situation. How did you stay so calm?" Malik smiled faintly. "It's about training and patience," he said. "Years of learning how to control both your body and your mind, and knowing that sometimes the best action is to do nothing until necessary." The man nodded, clearly impressed. "People need to see this," he said. "Not just your skill, but how you stayed calm. It's inspiring." Malik didn't say much in response. He was never one to seek praise, and he understood that this incident would be remembered not for his skill, but for the way he handled himself under pressure. That was the lesson he hoped people would take away. Nearby, the parking lot staff were organizing the area, making sure cars could move freely again. Security continued speaking with the aggressor, asking him for details about what had happened, while Malik stepped back, giving them space. He knew he had done enough. He had neutralized the threat, maintained his safety, and kept everyone around him unharmed. That was all that mattered. As Malik moved toward the entrance of the shopping center, he noticed that several bystanders were still recording short clips on their phones. A few whispered to each other, "I can't believe how calm he was. Look at the way he moved. He's like a professional." Others exchanged stories describing how every movement Malik had made seemed purposeful, controlled, and precise. They weren't just impressed by the physical aspect, they were impressed by the composure, the mental strength, and the wisdom behind each action. Social media, even at that moment, was beginning to pick up snippets of the confrontation. Videos posted online were already garnering attention, with viewers praising Malik for his restraint and focus. "Look at this calmness under pressure," one commenter wrote. He didn't even attack back, but he handled the situation perfectly. Another added, "This is what true strength looks like, discipline, not aggression." Malik was aware that clips might go viral, but he didn't let that affect him. He didn't act for recognition. Every move he made had been about protecting himself and ensuring no one got hurt. Still, he couldn't help but feel a quiet satisfaction that others could learn from the moment. That was the real value, he thought. Not the praise or attention, but the example of restraint and self-control. As he entered the shopping center, Malik noticed a few people approaching security, asking questions about the incident. Many wanted to know if Malik would press charges, if the aggressor would face legal consequences, or what would happen next. Malik had no intention of pursuing revenge or making the man pay for his actions. He knew that doing so would only fuel more anger and negativity. Instead, he chose to focus on teaching, inspiring, and sharing his experience in a constructive way. Inside the center, Malik continued his errands, but he noticed a subtle shift in the atmosphere. People who had seen the confrontation gave him small nods of acknowledgement, smiles of respect, or quick words of admiration. Children pointed discreetly to him, whispering to their parents about the man who stayed calm and strong. Even strangers who had not been directly involved seemed to sense something different about him, an aura of quiet, authority, and discipline. At the same time, Malik reflected internally. He knew that situations like these were a reminder of the unpredictability of life. Anyone could be confronted by aggression or prejudice at any moment, and while physical skill was useful, the true test was in mental control. Being able to remain calm, think clearly, and act appropriately under pressure was what separated someone truly disciplined from someone who reacted purely on instinct. By now, news outlets had begun to report the incident. Short clips of Malik moving calmly, neutralizing the aggressor without striking, were shown alongside commentary about the rising importance of self-discipline and conflict resolution. Many highlighted the role of training, patience, and mental control. Malik didn't watch these reports, he didn't seek attention, but he knew that the lesson of restraint was spreading far beyond the parking lot. Later, Malik stepped outside for a brief break, sitting on a nearby bench to collect his thoughts. He reflected on how quickly a simple disagreement over a parking spot had escalated, how fast anger and prejudice could surface, and how easily a situation could have turned dangerous. But he also recognized that his ability to stay calm had made all the difference. Without losing control, without responding with anger or violence, he had protected himself, prevented harm to others, and maintained his dignity. A few people approached him as he sat quietly. "I just wanted to say thank you," one said softly. "You showed all of us that you can be strong without hurting anyone." Malik nodded. "Thank you. That's exactly the point. Strength isn't about proving dominance, it's about protecting yourself and those around you while staying in control." His voice was calm, deliberate, and reflective. Even the shoppers who had not witnessed the confrontation directly could sense the story unfolding. Word spread quickly. "Did you hear about the man in the parking lot?" "Yes, the one who stayed calm while that other guy was yelling and shoving." These whispers carried admiration, but also a subtle sense of hope. Seeing someone act with composure in the face of aggression reminded people that restraint and intelligence were more powerful than anger or force. Malik eventually returned to his errands, moving through the shopping center with a quiet awareness of the respect he had earned, even without seeking it. He knew the day would be remembered not because of violence or confrontation, but because of how a single person could show restraint, composure, and humanity in a challenging situation. As the afternoon turned toward evening, Malik left the shopping center and returned to his car. The parking lot, once tense and chaotic, now felt ordinary again. People were leaving with their purchases, chatting about their day, the sun beginning to dip behind the buildings. Yet the impact of what had occurred lingered in the minds of those who had witnessed it. The story of restraint, calmness, and controlled strength had left an impression far deeper than any shouting, anger, or conflict could have. Malik settled into his car, reflecting once more on the incident. It was a reminder that life often presented tests that went beyond physical skill. Character, patience, and the ability to remain composed under pressure were what truly defined a person's strength. He thought about how easily the situation could have turned violent, how quickly someone's judgment could fail in the face of anger, and how important it was to remain grounded in one's principles. Even as he drove away, Malik knew that the day would not be forgotten by the witnesses. They had seen not just a confrontation, but a lesson in human behavior, discipline, and strength. Some would carry that lesson forward, consciously or unconsciously, inspired by the calm authority he had demonstrated. Others would reflect on their own behavior, perhaps reconsidering how they reacted to anger or aggression. By the time Malik reached home, the incident had already begun spreading online, shared by those who had recorded it, discussed by viewers, and admired by people far beyond the parking lot. Comments praised his restraint, his composure, and his intelligence in handling a difficult situation. The focus was not on the aggressor, but on Malik's example, a lesson in how to remain human and controlled in the face of hostility. As evening settled in, Malik reflected quietly. He understood that this day would stay with him, not because of recognition, not because of the videos online, but because it was a real test of character. And in that reflection he felt a deep sense of satisfaction, not pride, but the quiet knowledge that he had acted correctly, with integrity, and with true strength. The lesson was clear, both for Malik and for anyone who might hear his story. Strength is not measured by force, anger, or aggression. True strength comes from control, patience, and the courage to act with wisdom and humanity even when provoked. And in that quiet, unassuming way, Malik had demonstrated it for everyone to see. The evening air was cool as Malik walked toward his car, the sun slowly dipping behind the buildings and casting long shadows across the parking lot. The chaos of earlier had faded, but the memory of the confrontation remained vivid in his mind. Today had started like any other day, errands, grocery lists, a simple trip to the shopping center. But by the time he left, it had turned into something far more meaningful. A reminder of the way human behavior and choices could shape a moment, and how discipline and calmness could change outcomes. Malik paused for a moment, leaning against his car, reflecting on everything that had happened. The aggressor had been furious, reckless, and prejudiced, convinced that he could intimidate someone simply because of anger and entitlement. But Malik had stood his ground, not with violence but with control, patience, and skill. It was a test, and he had passed not by overpowering the man but by mastering himself. As he drove home, the city lights beginning to glow softly, Malik thought about the people who had witnessed the event. The shoppers, the children, the staff, even the security guards, each of them had seen a demonstration of restraint and strength. Some had shared recordings online, capturing the calm precision of his movements. Others had spoken to him directly, praising his composure. Malik didn't seek that recognition, yet he understood its value. The lesson they carried forward was more important than any individual accolade. Once home, Malik parked his car and sat quietly for a moment, letting the day's events sink in. He thought about how quickly life could throw unexpected challenges in your path. A simple disagreement over a parking spot had escalated into aggression and prejudice. It could have ended badly if he hadn't remained calm, if he hadn't relied on his training and patience. But he had, and in doing so, he had ensured the safety of everyone involved, including the aggressor. Malik thought about his martial arts training and how it had shaped him beyond physical skill. It wasn't just about the ability to defend himself. It was about discipline, patience, and mental clarity. Those lessons had carried him through countless moments in life, helping him make decisions when others might have acted impulsively. Today had been one of those moments, a real-life test of control and composure. The videos of the confrontation had already started circulating online. Comments were pouring in, praising his calmness, his skill, and most importantly, his restraint. "This is what true strength looks like," one person wrote. "Control, patience, and calmness over violence." Another added, "He could have hurt that man, but he didn't. That's the real lesson here." Malik scrolled through a few comments, feeling no need for praise but a quiet satisfaction that the story was inspiring others. The lesson of restraint and discipline was spreading further than the parking lot itself. Malik also thought about the aggressor. He knew the man would likely reflect on the event in his own way, perhaps with shame, anger, or denial. But Malik didn't hold anger or resentment toward him. He understood that aggression often comes from